in this episode of The Portrait?
The short answer is no, because I always say, what use would if I carried around anger or resentment or ill will, I would still be HIV positive, and I'd just be HIV positive and angry.
Sure.
It's not going to change my status now, is it?
You're listening to an episode of my podcast Portrætpodden, as it's pronounced in my native Norwegian, or The Portrait, as I refer to it in English. This is the podcast where I interview my biggest heroes, those who greatly influence and inspire me, who makes me think, and helps me better understand the world I'm living in. My name is Mats Lasse Youngås, and together with my guest, actor, writer, advocate Nathaniel Hall, we will be the voices in your head for the next hour. Do you remember your first time? Nathaniel can't seem to forget his. To be fair, he's had it playing on repeat for the last 19 years. His solo show First Time tells the harrowing true story of the first time he had sex and contracted HIV, only age 16. Through the play and his advocacy, Nathaniel hopes to get rid of the stigma and fear surrounding an HIV diagnosis and how it is possible to stay positive in a negative world. I'm truly honored that Nathaniel graciously took the time out of his busy schedule to be my guest in this episode. So, without any further ado, here is Nathaniel Hall. Yeah. The Portrait is back after a short hiatus, and what a guest to return with. My next guest is an actor, writer, advocate, and he's HIV positive, having contracted it at age 16. His tour de force one-man play First Time tells his story in a beautiful, harrowing, and poignant show, having received 5-star reviews all over the board. You've also seen him in It's a Sin on Channel 4 in the UK or streaming here on HBO Max in Norway. So how do you use theatre to tell stories of trauma? And what it's like to be HIV positive today? That's some of the things I'd really like to learn more about with my next guest, Nathaniel Hall. Nathaniel, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for that wonderful introduction.
Well, always a good idea to start off on the best foot, I found.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. We'll naturally get into First Time and your work as an actor and writer and the aftermath of all that. But I usually try to find out what I have in common with my guests, just to create a common ground before we get into difficult questions. So I figure we're both Northerners, different countries, of course, but still. We're both queer, we're both white cis men, we're both advocates against trauma and stigma, and we both use art to tell a story. We're both roughly the same age. So that's what I figure we have in common. What we don't have in common is what we're going to find out during the course of this episode. But let's start then with, how does a wee kid from Stockport get into acting?
Well, I got into acting because my mum was into acting. In fact, I was in my mum's tummy when she was pregnant with me while she was on stage. So I would say that's how I got the acting bug. But I mean, my mum's always been into she runs an amateur community theatre group. She's always been involved in that for many years. So I kind of grew up in that environment, going with her to rehearsals, to see shows and backstage, and kind of getting the bug from that, really. I always seem to remember the smell of the theatre. It was a really old converted church. It was converted into a theatre, but it was an old church. And that sort of unique smell that theatres have, the sort of dusty costume smell. And that, whenever I smell that, I get really excited because I know I'm in a theatre. So yeah, it was really through that. And then I, as I got older, I started to go to youth theatre groups and then, and dance classes. And then I was, joined bigger theatre groups in Manchester city centre, so Contacts and the Royal Exchange, which is a really beautiful theatre in Manchester, and then the National Youth Theatre. So it kind of just progressed from there, and I always knew that that's really what I wanted to do with my life.
Wasn't any point you ever thought I might as well be a window cleaner or something?
Yeah, absolutely. Almost daily I go, I might just pack all this in and become an accountant or something. Yeah. Which, do you know, to be honest, I'm not just an actor, and often, you know, I struggle sometimes to use that term because I don't feel like I do that much acting really. But I run a theatre company as well, and all of my work is creative. You know, I'm a writer, I'm a public speaker, I'm a director, a creative producer, all those things. It is one of those jobs. It is a real vocation. You have to absolutely adore it. And there's many times actually where I've nearly thrown in the towel and gone, I can't do this anymore because it's not been viable. And so, yeah, absolutely. It's not for the faint-hearted, this industry.
Also, if most actors that I've talked to have this sort of imposter syndrome, but all of them want to be accountants. So
I don't want to be accountants. I do enough spreadsheets. I've just finished doing a spreadsheet before we came onto this to do this podcast. I said to my producer the other day, I said, all I've seemed to have done for the last 4 months is spreadsheets and apply for money, which is great because actually, you know, hopefully that will all pay off and then there'll be a period of being creative. But sure, that's the reality, you know. If you're particularly as I am running a theatre company, you've got to find the money from somewhere and you've got to finance it. So, you know, so that's the reality of it. So I do say to people, if you want to get into this, you know, be prepared for that, you know, as well as the amazing fun bits, you know, like actually acting or performing and doing creative things.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of spreadsheets and menial tasks behind the acting with Stephen Fry in a TV show, and yeah, so the glamorous part is like the top of the iceberg. Let's dive a bit deeper into it then. So you, as I said in the introduction, you got HIV when you were 16. Do you mind? I'm sure you've told this story dozens of times already, but do you mind telling the story again for my listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Stockport, which is a medium-sized town in Greater Manchester, so it's very, very close to the city centre of Manchester. And I had a really lovely, you know, middle-class upbringing. We I have lovely parents. I've got 2 older brothers and a younger sister, you know, and have really fond memories of growing up as a child, but always knew that deep down that there was something different about me, and you know, as a child not quite understanding what that difference was. And you know, and as I approached, you know, 16 and was going through puberty, obviously I started to realise that difference was that I was gay, and that was really tough. That was really, really hard, because I like to think back to the world that I grew up in, and I thought it was a really progressive, you know, world and a really kind and caring world. But actually for LGBTQ people, it really wasn't here in the UK. I left school in 2003. And up until that year, right from the late 1980s onwards, there was legislation that stopped schools talking about homosexuality in any positive manner. And so sex education, relationship education, which was already pretty poor anyway, was almost the talk of, you know, you may be different, you may be attracted to the same sex, you know, you may feel that you're not in the same gender or whatever. Those conversations did not take place ever, and homophobic bullying was not dealt with. So I was bullied quite relentlessly, really, because obviously I was different to the other boys. I liked drama, I liked dance, you know, I wasn't into football, you know, all those kind of things. And at age 16, I was head boy at my school, so I was also bullied for that as well. But I was sort of secretly having I'd had girlfriends all the way through school, obviously, and then I was having a sort of a secret affair with the deputy head boy. But I always say that, Stockport in 2003 really wasn't ready for us. I wanted to go to the prom with him. That was the dream. Like you see, I don't know if people know the film Everybody's Talking About Jamie, which is about it's a big, really, really big story from here in the UK. That was what we're talking about. Like trying to go to the prom with a boy in your arm was, non-existent. And so I actually met someone who was older than me, which feels like sometimes a rite of passage for LGBTQ people, or it certainly did for my generation anyway. If I think about, growing up in secrecy in the kind of 90s and noughties or whatever. So I met this guy on a park bench in Stockport, and actually I was waiting for the cream tuxedo that I wanted for my prom. And I decided that because I couldn't go with a boy on my arm, that I would make a statement still. So I had to have a cream tuxedo. Everyone else wore black, but I had to be different in some way. And it was that twist of fate that led me to meeting this guy who was older than me on a park bench. He was about 10 years older than me. And we hit it off and we started, a relationship. And for me, it was very exciting and thrilling and validating and, all those things, because all of a sudden somebody was showing me all this attention, and it was what I obviously craved. And maybe a little bit, I knew it was too old for me. Maybe it was a bit of a two fingers up at my kind of safe middle class, upbringing. It was kind of like going out to bars, I was obviously underage and all that stuff. And then as a result of that was a kind of a summer romance. And as a result of that, I got very sick. I was on holiday in Menorca with my family, and I got very, very, very poorly. I was, from both ends at the same time, let's just put it that way. I came home from that, and we saw the emergency doctor, and they said a waterborne virus, probably from holiday. It'll get better. And I started college in the autumn. My parents by that point had sort of found out about this guy. We'd had a conversation. My mum had sat me down and told me I was gay, which was made that easy. But also, they'd not said I couldn't see this guy. They're not that sort of parents, but they, spoke of their disapproval and that kind of thing. So I called it off because, we were totally from different worlds, and I was going to college and ready to, have new exciting adventures there, I guess. And then fast forward to later that autumn, so in the November of that autumn, 2003, being very, very sick, still not really getting better from that illness from the holiday. I'd lost about 2 stone in weight. So I look at pictures of myself. I looked unwell. My skin looked grey, and I had a cough that I couldn't shake. And I started to get other symptoms, as well, downstairs. So it's not the kind of symptoms that any teenage boy wants. And so at that point, I took myself to the GUM clinic, the General Urinary Medicine Clinic, as they used to be called, at the hospital. And they offered me a range of tests, and they offered me a HIV test, which at that time you could refuse. You could opt out of that test. So I did. I opted out. But they obviously saw the risk that I placed myself under, and then my symptoms, that I was presenting with kind of matched up. So they continually sort of gently pressed and found reasons for me to come back to the clinic and ask me again. So eventually I conceded, and I took the HIV test. And I found out after a 2-week agonising wait for the result. It was 2 weeks before my 17th birthday, so I was still 16. And that's when I found out that I was HIV positive, and that's kind of when everything changed forever.
You are listening to The Portrait. I'm your host, Mats Lasseangos. I was going to ask a very stupid question. It sounds stupid when I say it out loud, but what's going through your head when you get that?
Yeah, I think people often ask me this, and it is really hard. We're also talking about something that happened 19 years ago now, and I remember very clearly walking down, it was a long corridor, and I'd been to the clinic a number of times, and there were lots of rooms coming off this corridor, waiting area, and then you go down this corridor and all these different rooms. And I remember they called me and they walked me all the way down the corridor to the room at the end, and I'd never been that far down the corridor. And as I walked into the room, it was one of those rooms. It wasn't a an examination room with kind of like a hospital bed and a curtain or anything. It had two chairs, two soft chairs, and a table with a box of tissues in the middle. And it was at that moment I knew, because I was like, why would you bring me to this room if it wasn't bad news? And I describe it as being hit like a truck. I don't really think I can explain it any other way. I stayed there with the health advisor. I think they recognised I was obviously very young, probably for about an hour, which is, not normal really. Normally they would give you the thing and kind of send you on your way. And I remember coming home on the bus and just kind of being in this daze and walking up to the front door and putting the keys in the door and just hesitating and going, I can walk into the kitchen and I can go and tell my mom and my dad and kind of go, this is what's happened. Or I can go upstairs and I can kind of run away from it in a sense. And that's what I did. I went upstairs because, at that point, the shame and the self-stigma, it would continue to affect my life for years after that, but it was so powerful. And I went upstairs to my bedroom and I lined up some paracetamol, and I thought, I always joke I was never going to do it. It was like, that's what you, as a teenager, that's what you see in like teenage soaps and stuff, isn't it? So it was kind of like playing the role. But the thought was there, and we can kind of laugh it off in that sense, but the thought was there. And thankfully, I put those to one side and then I just boxed it up really. And I just tried to get on with life. I just kind of told myself, well, that thing's happened, can't change it. Let's get on. But I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell many people for about 15 years.
Well, if it's allowed to say that you're lucky in such a situation, at least you're lucky it happened when it happened and not in the 80s, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I watch something like It's a Sin or, dramas or films around, about HIV and AIDS in the 80s and 90s. But how lucky I was. I was 7 years after the advent of effective medication, 7 years. It's not much at all. Yeah. And in fact, actually the medications that were available when I was diagnosed were not like the medications that are available today. And the process for putting you onto medication was very different because the side effects were quite often very difficult to manage and handle. So, HIV medication is for life. So they married that up with, waiting as long as possible for you to not go onto medication. So, that was 5 years for me. So there was 5 years of HIV multiplying in my body and damaging my immune system and making me feel worse and worse and worse until I was actually put onto medication. And also before we knew that medication did what it did in terms of making your viral load undetectable so that you can't pass it on, which we now know scientifically. So also living with this fear, this constant anxiety about passing it on constantly, which obviously then impacts your relationships and your kind of psychosexual well-being as well. Yeah.
Today, luckily, you're able to live a full life and you're not in any risk of passing it on. And we have PrEP, and that is, as far as I know, free on the NHS now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I just mentioned, the undetectable viral load thing, if you're on effective medication and your viral load is undetectable, it basically, the virus is still in you in minute traces in places, far-reaching places that medication can't get to, but it's not present in any in enough quantity in bodily fluids like semen and blood to actually pass on. So it means that you can have unprotected sex. It's 100% proven across the world through a number of, a whole range of studies. And yeah, like PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, which is the drug that people who are HIV negative can take to stop them contracting HIV, is very, very effective, is available for free on the NHS in England. But there are challenges and barriers to people getting that. Not every hospital trust knows about it or kind of promotes it, and there are all sorts of reasons why people might either just don't know about it or are afraid to ask for it as well. So there's still work to be done around that.
Yeah. And speaking of that, well, being HIV positive today, it isn't a death sentence as it used to be, but there's still a stigma there, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, people with HIV, as long as you're diagnosed relatively quickly, and you don't live for a long time with HIV going untreated and you get straight onto treatment, there's no reason why you won't live a longer life expectancy. In some studies are shown, and that's partly because people with HIV, are regularly engaging with healthcare. I go every 6 months. I have everything checked, everything. If there is any minute indication of cancer or heart disease or any of those big things that worry us as we get into later life, they'll be picked up instantly. And then I think a lot of people living with HIV, like myself, often go, I want to be healthy. So you look after yourself more, I think, when you've got a long-term condition. Not always, but, I think that is commonplace between people I know. So yeah, life expectancy is great for people on medication. And we have to remember that across the world, access to HIV medication is not equal. And there are many countries where people don't have access to medication. It's a travesty that we have affordable, effective medication, and there are still people dying from AIDS-related illnesses across the world. That just shouldn't be happening. And that's in some countries, that's significant numbers of people as well. Here in the UK, we have very few deaths from advanced HIV or AIDS-related causes, but we do have a lot of late diagnosis with HIV, and so we've got people who've maybe got complications because they've been diagnosed so late, health complications, or as well, if you don't know you've got it and you've lived with it for 5, 10, whatever years, and you potentially passed it on to a number of people. So it's really important to remind people about getting tested as well, because regular testing is the only way that will actually eradicate HIV eventually.
I think also might just be me reacting to the stigma and the how it's framed in the media, but I needed to take a HIV test twice in my life. Once after I was raped. That was just standard. I had no choice. And once recently, after I came back home to Norway, both negative. I'm glad, but the I don't know, 2 hours or something I waited, the worst hours of my life. So I can't imagine what it's like when Nick comes back positive.
Yeah, but I mean, thanks for sharing that with us. But I think the interesting thing for me to say is that the fear that you felt in those 2 hours is kind of, to minimize the fear, because it's there, and I felt it when I got tested, and I know people feel it when they get tested. It really shouldn't be there, because HIV is completely treatable. And particularly if you live in a Western nation with good healthcare or good access to healthcare, then in the majority of cases that is covered under, universal basic healthcare plans, or, in the NHS here in England. And it is that fear that comes from the stigmatization of the disease in the early part of the 80s and 90s. And, how it was framed, particularly in the Western world, as, gay and bisexual men, people who were promiscuous, drug users. It was kind of their fault, and then also from the African perspective as well, kind of there's a racist element added into that as well. But that fear around it just really shouldn't be there. My doctor says to me, I'd much rather diagnose you with HIV than diabetes. And people don't live daily in fear of getting diabetes, or there are other sexually transmitted infections that are much harder to treat, different types of hepatitis, and there are rising strains of syphilis is back, here in the UK particularly, third stage syphilis is untreatable. It's really interesting to me as an activist when I talk to people, and I totally understand it, but that's why we have to do all this work to remind people that actually out of the STIs, you don't want to go shopping for HIV. Life without HIV is much easier, but it is not something to be feared in the way that has kind of been ingrained in us from kind of messages from the past, and also when we watch things like TV dramas that are rooted in the past around HIV, they're great, and obviously we should document that time, but I think sometimes they play into that fear and that cycle of fear.
And it's actually great way to think about it, because most people aren't lying awake at night fearing having diabetes or high cholesterol or whatever. Again, we're sort of in inverted commas conditioned to fear the great HIV. But luckily we're both white Western men. We are spoiled. If something were to happen, then we're in safe hands. Medication works. You're healthy. You're still here. Luckily,
absolutely, yeah. I mean, whenever I take that tablet, I take a tablet once a day. It's three medicines in it, and it's a while for me to find a therapy that I could stomach. The first therapy I was on affected my. It gave me hallucinations and affected my mental well-being quite badly, made me very paranoid. But this medicine has no side effects, but it reminds me every time I take it. It's a little reminder for me. I'm on borrowed time. Undoubtedly, it's very rare for somebody, untreated HIV to live, 19 years as I have done. More years with HIV than without, and that's amazing. That miracle, that little. Some people talk about it being, some people with HIV hate taking the medication because it reminds them. For me, that little tablet reminds me that this incredible, scientific achievement that keeps me alive, that stops me from getting sick is amazing. And I'm grateful every single day when I take that tablet, that it protects me, it protects my partners, and it's amazing.
Speaking of advocating and breaking down the stigma and the fear around HIV, that's why it's so such a important thing that we have your play, for example.
Can you remember your first time? I can't seem to forget mine. Mind you, I have had it playing on repeat for the last 15 years.
Nathaniel's emotional and breathtaking solo show First Time tells his very real, personal story about contracting, living with, and dealing with HIV. First Time smashes through the stigma and shame of HIV to present an uplifting and inspirational guide to staying positive in a negative world. First presented by DB Theatre and Woodside Arts, First Time went on to critical and audience acclaim on tour of the UK and at the 2019 Edinburgh Festival Fringe. Seeing the point of view from someone actually living it, that brought a whole new perspective to it for me. So I didn't have that fear anymore, and felt now it isn't the dangerous ghost lurking in the corner as it used to be. What was the main motivation, I guess, for telling your story on stage?
What I always say to people, one of my main reasons was no one was giving me any work. I would say as an actor, well, just make some for yourself. Like, I think the reason that was one of the driving factors, but actually that was linked to where my life had gone in relation to the shame and the self-stigma around HIV and around my sexuality as well. And in 2017, I was, which is where you meet me at the start of the show, with white powder on my face, still in my pants, kind of not been to bed for 2 days, and that was a realization for me that actually the pain and the trauma, and I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, I now know, and anxiety disorder, relating to things that have happened to me in my past, that were playing out through drugs and alcohol and toxic relationships and, all these kind of things. And my life had really stagnated, and you can't be an actor and a writer and a performer if you're stuck in that world, and if you're stuck in that place of shame and low self-confidence and low self-worth. So it was really that kind of spurred me on. And I knew it was the secret. It was carrying this secret that made me, I believe, by not telling people, I believed the narrative that it was something to be ashamed of. So I truly believed it inside me, and I had to change that. And the only way to do that was say it out loud. So making the play was this way to kind of force myself, because I tried for so many years to be more open about my HIV status. And so when I started to write the play as a therapeutic thing, but then when it got commissioned, it was like, oh, right, okay, the train has now left the station, and he's going to arrive very soon. So I have to tell my family. And I did. I wrote them a letter. And it was this kind of process of forcing myself to be authentic, to be honest, to be truthful, and to rid myself of the shame, to go, look, these are things that have happened. I've done some bad things in my life. I've done some great things in my life. I've been no one's all good and all bad. It's just kind of getting it all out. And then also as well, there was a sense that, like you said, around portrayals of HIV, they're often rooted in the early part of the HIV and AIDS epidemic. So they're often rooted in illness, disease, death, dying, and also kind of the fight for better healthcare. And that's totally fine. And they're really important stories. But as someone living with HIV, I just didn't see, people like me living with it. So I wanted to tell that story. And what does it feel like to live, with probably the world's most stigmatized illness? What is the impact, and how do you explain to people that thing, that the feeling of stigma? Because if you've never felt it, you've never experienced stigma, you don't understand it. So I was trying to express what that felt like. And, and there's a new generation as well. I think I'm in a middle period. We've had sort of the AIDS era, with the advent of medication, and now we're moving into this kind of new era with preventive methods like PrEP, and also moving towards injectable drugs, and hopefully towards a cure, and, reducing transmissions. The goal is to end all new transmissions by 2030. So, there's going to be there's a whole new generation that are younger than me, or well, not younger than me, but diagnosed more recently than me, who have a different relationship to their HIV as much as I have a different relationship to people who lived through the 1980s and 90s as well. So the play was all that, really, and it was just wanting to get that out. But I never, I'll be really honest, I never expected it to do as well as it did. Like, okay. I threw everything into it, personally and professionally, but I was sort of prepared for it to do like a few shows and maybe talk to like a local newspaper and maybe a local radio station, and that was it. And, when the show premiered, I was on the BBC Breakfast Couch, broadcast across the nation. I was in BBC News, which was shared in the Spanish-speaking network, BBC Mundo, to across the world. BuzzFeed news article, it just went on and on and on, and my story just really snowballed from there, and it was quite a whirlwind, to be honest, to go through, but it's something I'm really, really grateful for.
You are listening to The Portrait. I'm your host, Mats Lasseangos. Yeah, and does that then, I don't know, make it easier to stand there on stage being Nathaniel for 70 minutes and just telling your story when you you know that the product you have is a very strong piece and people are going to react to it? Does it make it easier with time to tell a story?
Yeah, I mean, the more you tell it, the less it feels like your own story. I mean, when I was performing, I did 100 shows of first time, and when you're performing it night after night, you're getting into a character. It's it's the same process. It still does have an impact on my mental well-being. I do have to keep a check on that. But I think when we first performed it in 2018, and that was to the home crowd. So there was a lot of people came, but a lot of those people knew me in some way, So I would say about 40% of the audience probably had a connection to me in some way. And that's great because they're obviously willing me to do well and, and you get lots of praise. The real scary part is when you take it to the away crowd. So, when we first took it on tour, we went to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in 2019, and that was like, that's where, all the theatre critics are there. This is less about like people close to you kind of going, you did an amazing thing. And, you're kind of opening yourself up to that. And that was, thankfully where it went really well. And, I still can't get my head around it. It's just like review after review after review were 5 stars and 4 stars. And it, just completely blew me away. And that obviously helped me on my personal journey with my confidence, not just in my artistry, but in my confidence also with my story and to tell my story. And then also to help others, and hopefully inspire others to tell theirs.
Working on the play and what it's like performing it as yourself. You've been swarmed with positive praise and reviews, and I'm sure you've gotten a lot more attention than you were planning on. What is it? Just to resume, how is it to stand there and over time more like playing a part, but still you're still Nathaniel, right?
Yeah, I think when I first wrote the show, that process was really very cathartic and actually quite painful to go through. And the first performances were very raw, and I think that's potentially why it connected very, very well with people as well, because that's the aim, isn't it? That's the ultimate goal as a performer is to have that, that natural performance that where the emotion is naturally there, but actually the real skill of the actor, particularly the theatre actor, is to be able to recreate that night after night without actually feeling it, because you can't cry on demand, night after night. It's impossible. So that's the real skill. Actually, over time, the performance became more of a performance, but what I was doing was recreating the original source kind of performance. And I always talk to people about, as a performer, a bit like a dancer, it's a choreography, but it's a choreography that involves emotions, words, movement, light, sound, and there's a real energy and a feel to how it's performed and how you hit each beat and each moment. And the more you get to do it, the more you just remember that, and it becomes almost muscle memory. It doesn't mean to say that you don't feel or connect with what you're performing, but it means that you can recreate it safely, and it's not diving or delving deep into your own kind of trauma or pain or psyche in a way that is really unhealthy to do, because sitting in that for a long time is quite hard. But that said, performing the show on regularly, it did have an impact on me, and it does have an impact on me, and I had to have, make sure that I had therapy alongside it, and also be in conversation with my team to monitor. I have a range of different symptoms or triggers that I can feel coming in if my post-traumatic stress is kind of starting to come back. And so it's for me as well, it was about learning how to become more in tune with my own self, my own sense of self, my own well-being, and be really honest about that, because otherwise those things could, in the past, those things would have led to hitting the self-destruct button, and kind of doing, calling the drug dealer, or whatever. And it's actually about being aware of, before you get to that point, where you're at and how you manage that. So in that sense as well, the show's been really positive for me because it's helped me do that work that I think most of us probably need to do, particularly when we get into our 30s.
Yeah. A lot of soul searching going on the second you turn 30.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of great stories and plays and movies in the theater about TV about serious topics and based on true stories and autobiographical, but get this like a glossy veneer over it. You have this sort of distance to it, but then knowing that it is your story, you're the one telling it. And speaking of that, I have the brilliant playtext.
Look at it! There it is.
Yeah. I still haven't gotten signed though, so I'm working on that. That's a must-buy for anyone listening to this. But with that being out in the world and theater being theater, have you ever been approached by someone wanting to do your play and play you?
we have actually. I've had a few approaches whilst the show was on tour, because it's a licensed play, it's licensed by Nick and Books, so you'd have to apply for a professional license, and normally you wouldn't allow another show to be happening whilst one was, particularly not in the same country anyway. But we've talked about it being licensed for other performances. I think I'd be really interested to see it, actually. I think for people that have seen the show or have read the script, they'll probably say it probably won't work. I think you'd probably feel a little bit hoodwinked because the show, one of the things that I try to do with the show as an artist is use all the sort of theatrical techniques to kind of make you forget that it's me. So there's all sorts of, in the first few scenes, there's really, there's like confetti cannons and audience participation, and you kind of get wrapped up in the whirlwind of being a teenager and all those kind of going to the prom, all these things and first love. And that's done on purpose to kind of, to get you to forget that it's me, and to get you to forget that this show is actually about me being diagnosed with HIV when I'm 16. And so when you hit that point in the play, you're all of a sort of reminded, and there's a scene directly after the diagnosis where I kind of just don't know what to do. And that reflected the process. The process was, I'd written all that stuff and I was like, I just don't know what else to say after this point, because I've now we're probably about a third of the way through the play, and I've probably got 2/3 of the play left to tell 15, well, at that point, 15 years, it's now more than that, 19 years of life. How do you even start? Yeah. And so there's these moments in the play, and that's just one of them, where all the pretense of the theatre is taken away. So in the actual show, when you see it, you've got all the lights and all the, the sound, as a theatre show should look beautiful. And there's these moments where that all goes and you're just reminded that it's me. So it's just me and a spotlight, or at the end of the show, it's just me and there's no stage lights. It's just the theatre space, and it's a mess, and it's real life. So it was really important for me to try and remind my audience so that they couldn't, like you say, that veneer, that kind of distance that you get when you tell your story to somebody and then they script it and then somebody else plays it, which is great, and it's a totally legitimate way to make it. But I think, again, there's something about the immediacy of the artist, the performer, whose story is being on stage. And there's a long line, of amazing solo artists that I really admire and really inspired my work, and who do this, and do autobiographical work like this. And yeah, you're right. It's a really immediate way to do it, and I think it really connects with an audience. But I've not had a request recently. If I do, I might say yes. I mean, the thing with it as well is I can charge someone to put on my show, so I've got to earn a living. Yeah. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I think I know that it is used. It has been approved for use on the GCSE exam syllabus. So for 15 and 16-year-olds doing their exams in drama, they can actually use sections of this text, and it's approved. So maybe there are some teenagers somewhere reading sections from my play and hhopefully getting good grades with it.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. It would be. I'm just spitballing and imagining here, but I think it would be a bit strange sitting in the audience going, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's performance of First Time by Nathaniel Hall. Nathaniel Hall for this performance will be played by Ollie Alexander.
Yeah.
That's no knock on Ollie Alexander, just in case you're listening. I really want you on my show. No disrespect, but it would feel a bit disingenuous, if that's the correct word.
Yeah, and I, also the thing I think, if I watch it and I'd be like, oh my God, they perform me better than I do, and that would be really hurt. Like, no. But yeah, I think, and that's one of the interesting things about playing your own story as well, because it's quite hard to disattach. And I've performed this story for a number of years now, and I've had some, other acting jobs and stuff in between, but actually I found it quite difficult to get into the idea of, I'm not being me. No. Because I've been me on stage for so long. So, yeah.
Yeah. You said in other interviews I've heard while doing research to this, that you rediscovered a lot of elements and aspects of your story while writing this show. And stuff you suppressed and forgotten, and then reappearing. So, do you have any ill will towards that guy you met at 16, for example?
In the short answer is no, because I always say, what use would me? What if I carried around anger or resentment or ill will? I would still be HIV positive, and I'd just be HIV positive and angry.
Sure.
It's not going to change my status now, is it? So my take has always been that I do understand that that's quite a hard thing to get place to be at. There are times when I felt anger, obviously, and resentment. But when I started to write the show, I think because I'd really just refused to talk about what had happened, there was a version of the story that I'd sort of told myself to protect myself, and that version was that it was a platonic relationship. We were on the same level, and then as I was writing the show, one of the scenes that actually ended up in the show called PTSD TV, and I wrote, I just sort of was free writing, and I wrote this whole thing, and I read it back, and I was really shocked at what I'd written, because it didn't chime with the story that I thought I knew. And what I'd written was that, I was essentially groomed by someone who was older than me. The vision that I see when I wrote was me sat in the bath after we'd had sex, and I'm 16, and I see a 16-year-old boy. That's what I was, on the cusp of becoming an adult, but still a boy, and somebody in their sort of mid-20s, and him knelt beside me, sponging me down, and I just go, that doesn't look romantic as an adult. No. That's not necessary, but it did open up the box then, because then there's all these questions of, well, is that a real memory? Is that, what's the real memory? And you'll never find out, because at that point it was 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And then you start to have other memories, and there are memories where we, like, maybe there was alcohol and drugs involved, and kind of the memory goes blank. And you just can't quite remember what happened after that. How did I get home? How did that thing happen? So I think, yeah, that's the difficult thing. And in the show, I try and explain that, rather than being like, oh, this is the memory. It's fixed. It's a fixed thing. It's not. If you experience PTSD, the whole point is that the memories are not fixed. They are sketchy and difficult to remember, and the feelings of those memories plague your life in ways that you don't always connect back to the thing that happened. So for me, with my PTSD, I have sleep paralysis and night terrors, and there's a dark presence, a dark figure in the room, or I lucid dream, so I'm awake but asleep at the same time, which is quite terrifying. And that's all linked back to the things that I've been through, and not just this one event, but various other things. So yeah, when you go on this journey, and I say to people come to me and go, I want to do what you've done, and I'm like, you have to be prepared. You have to be prepared that you might open up something that you didn't even know was there. You might think you know this story, but you might not. And you have to be ready for that, and you have to be ready to deal with the fallout of that. And that's why it's important to have, to do it ethically and have, counselling and therapeutic support and everything as you go on the journey for it.
Does it then give you a thirst, a hunger for further autobiographical pieces, or is this one enough?
Yes, it does. And I'm in the process of writing another play. This one is going to be semi-autobiographical. And there's a number of reasons for that. Partly because I want to listen to some other stories or from other people who've had similar but different experiences. And also because the events that are in it are much more recent. So there are things in which I feel there is not enough distance for me to say yet. So I feel like it's a bit of an ethical minefield. It's like, who knows who in my life, and how can I talk about those things without people going, oh, that's definitely that person. So by making it semi-autobiographical and bringing in some other elements of other people's stories, I think that will help protect people, but I think it will also enrich the piece, because it will have more than just my own experience in it. But that story is about, so I was in the years running up to me making First Time, I was in a very, very toxic relationship. There were lots of patterns of enabling one another in terms of patterns of behaviour, but also patterns of abuse as well. And, at times I would say that I was, not all the time, but I was at the moments where that relationship was abusive as well. So I'm trying to unpick all that through this show, and it's trying to look at that with a really compassionate lens, because looking at how growing up LGBTQ, or growing up as gay bisexual men in a homophobic environment, and also the kind of pressures of the toxic gender norms, how do they play into how men treat one another? And I think that's quite unique when under the lens of when you have two men in a relationship together, what does that look like? So that show's called Toxic, and that's coming in 2023. It just sounds like a laugh a minute. My shows, I should say, First Times doesn't sound like a laugh a minute, but it's really funny. It is. and Toxic will be as well. I think for me as an artist, it's really important not to shy away from difficult subject matter, but I think there is humour in the darkest of places, and also I think if you go to a dark place, you just always have to offer hope. I think for me, there were always I hate going to watching something that ends on a bleak note. I'm like, what's the point? Like, why am I going to get out of bed tomorrow morning on what drives us? Because we know life and existence is hard. What is driving us to get up in the morning to do stuff? So I always say there has to be hope. So there's always hope at the end of my shows. Yeah.
Almost felt bad just to plug it out again. First Time, the play is published by Nick Hearn Books, must buy. But I almost felt a bit bad reading that, knowing I would talk to you and almost stop myself from laughing at certain points.
It must be an interesting experience, to read it, because I mean, as a show, again, it's lots of that's done deliberately. So, there's moments where I sort of work my audience up into kind of hysteria, and use all the technical, all the theatrical techniques, and that's a really good way to go. For me as an artist, that makes them feel relaxed, and that's important. You've got to feel relaxed on this storytelling, especially as it's my story. If you don't feel safe to relax into it, then it's not going to work. But then also you can really play with that and crack a joke at a point that is not funny. Yeah. And it's really interesting to see what audiences really go for it and find that really funny, or like one person does, or it's a bit awkward, I'm quite I'll crack a joke at any point, I think, when I was cracking jokes when my grandma died, like in the room, it's our way of coping, isn't it? And for me, it's certainly a way of kind of breaking tension and coping. So but humor, I think, is a really, really interesting tool, to help people go on a difficult journey.
Yeah. You are listening to The Portrait. I'm your host, Mats Lasseangos. I want to pick up on something before our time here runs out officially this time. You said that your next play, Toxic, is semi-autobiographical, is also other people's stories. I found that in working on a short documentary movie I'm doing now about what happened to me. I'm also curating other people's stories told in confidentiality. And mixing that into my story, as it were. I also interviewed my own rapist for it, and to have his voice going through it. But I almost felt like sort of like a safety net, having other people's stories to lean on as well. Like officially, I want it not to be just about me and woe is me, because it isn't. But I wanted to tell several people's stories through my experiences. But I felt that was made a bit safer as well. So do you sort of feel like, when I'm going into this part of my life, I want to keep a certain distance to it? Or?
I think potentially, yeah. I think maybe there's a number of reasons, like I've already mentioned, but I think as well, I wanted to have, this is not going to be a solo show, so it's going to have two people in it. So it becomes more difficult to tell an autobiographical story, I think, with more than one person. Like, as in first time, I can just do and say anything that I want to tell this story, whereas crafting a two-hander play is a slightly different thing. And I think, maybe there is an element of protection. Maybe there's an element of going, like, keeping my ego in check as well, but also there's a creative challenge for me within it, because I want to go, because I know I can sit and tell my story. I've done it, and without sort of bragging, it got really good reviews. Like, I've done it. Like, it's, for me as an artist, that's not necessarily that exciting for me to just do that again, if that makes sense. Like, to just go, okay, well, here's the next part of my story. I know I could do that. I could probably do that with my eyes closed now, because I've done it. And for me, what's really exciting and interesting is going, okay, how do I challenge myself beyond that? So I was like, well, it's got to be two people, and it's going to have new live music in it. It's going to have movement in it. I've already set these kind of parameters to go. It's a step up, it's a step change. So the kind of semi-autobiographical thing also is part of that, because listening and listening to other people's stories and trying to, I guess, see the difference but find the common ground. So that when this show is on stage, it has as wide an impact as possible, and as many people as possible can go, actually, I feel, they might not, like with First Time, a lot of people might not have experienced HIV, but they go, they've had moments of real shame, or moments where they've really, like, been totally despondent, or or where they've got a secret they've wanted to tell other people and they haven't been able to. So it's about that and trying to find a universality to a single story so that it has as big an impact as possible, I think.
Quickly before I let you go, I always ask all my guests how the pandemic has affected them. Now we're seeing the tail end of that, and society is going more or less back to normal. But besides the obvious fact that all theaters were closed and you're unable to do your craft, how does a pandemic such as COVID affect someone who's already immunocompromised?
Compromised, yeah. Well, to be honest, it was really interesting to go into the coronavirus pandemic as somebody who kind of goes, we're still living in a pandemic. Yeah. And it's interesting now as we move out of the kind of restrictions or lockdown restrictions and that kind of thing. But COVID is still around. It's still very, very prevalent. Obviously, here in the UK, we've had an extremely successful vaccination program, which means that severity of disease is much lower, transmission rates are lower, but I think what's interesting is lots of people go, "Oh, COVID's over now," and I'm like, it's over until you get it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Or it's over until your granny dies from it, which is still happening. That is still happening, but because we're not sat in that lockdown thing with the news rolling on it, we go, it's over. And that's what it felt like with HIV. It feels like the 1980s and 90s finish and we got medication and everyone just kind of went, HIV's over now, isn't it? And actually, 38 million people live with HIV around the world and 37 million people have died from AIDS-related causes and continue to do so. It's not a pandemic or epidemic by the official title, but it's still there. And you live in this world as somebody who lives with it going, why is everyone not why is no one testing? You're like, why is everyone not getting tested regularly? Why is everyone writing to their MP and go, we need better this, we need better. And it's because you can't move through the world carrying everything. Do you know what I mean? You can't carry all those issues and problems. So it's interesting to me to see how we now got people going, oh, it's over. And I'm like, it's not over. The lockdowns are over. But for those people who are living with the consequences of coronavirus, whether that's they've lost, people to it, or whether, they are, very, very clinically vulnerable and still can't go out, that it's not over for them. But for me, HIV classed as immunocompromised, but actually my immune system's relatively decent. I've had coronavirus, and it wasn't fun, but I recovered from it. But for me, I didn't carry too much fear around contracting coronavirus, and I think that I know a lot of people with HIV were fearful, but for me, there's a kind of toughness, like, I've already hit me. Like, I've already got this thing. Like, yeah. I know that these things transmit and move around, and no matter what precautions are put in place or that society puts in place, some people will get it. No matter how many precautions you put in place around HIV, people will get it. Like, it's just something that you have to reconcile and make peace with. Otherwise, you would live frozen with fear. You wouldn't do anything. So for me, I think I hopefully struck a right balance. And professionally, it went really, really well, because it gave us time, although the theatres were closed, it gave us time to sit and reflect and plan and kind of go, what's next? And why are we doing this? Do we want to do it? What's our ethos? What are our values? And that was really important. So thankfully, it wasn't too much of a challenging time for me personally.
That's good to hear. Once again, third time's the charm. First time, the playtext is available to buy by Nick, from Nick Books. Do so. and check out this episode. Check out It's a Sin on Channel 4 or on HBO Max here in Norway. But in all sincerity, guys, especially you guys listening to this, get tested. Just do it.
Absolutely, I couldn't put it any better. Get tested. If you're worried about it, tell someone close to you, get that support that you need. But you can do home testing kits in many parts of the world now. It's a very simple procedure. We're so used to testing for coronavirus. It's no different. And look after your sexual health. If you're sexually active, then getting tested regularly is really important. And check out PrEP as well. If you are sexually active, go and speak to a sexual health advisor and go, is it right for me? Is it something that I should be taking? Because it's not for everyone. Not everyone needs it, but you should, if you're sexually active, have that conversation and find out whether it's right for you, because that is a really important tool as well to protect yourself.
You've been listening to an episode of The Portrait with me, Mats Lasse, and my guest at this time was Nathaniel Hall. My thanks once again to Nathaniel for taking the time to have this important and inspiring conversation with me. If this episode sparked any questions or concerns in you listening, then feel free to reach out. You'll find this podcast on Facebook and Instagram under the Norwegian name Portrettpodden. That's PORTRETTPODDEN. Or you can email me at portrettpodden@gmail.com. During this episode, you have heard clips from Nathaniel's show First Time. All music and audio used fall under fair use and intended for editorial purposes. The Portrait works in accordance with the ethical code of practice of the Norwegian press. Thank you very much for listening, and we will be back with another exciting and inspiring episode real soon.